I never thought the man I loved, the man I gave up everything for, my husband, would look me in the eyes and call me a nobody. My heart broke right there in front of his rich family, their fancy wine glasses frozen in their hands. That word, nobody, felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments, please, because I need to know someone's out there hearing this, because I'm not just screaming into empty walls. He said it because I wasn't born with money, because I come from a small town in Georgia, where my mom worked 2 jobs just to keep food on the table. I thought he saw me, the real me, the one who loved him with everything I had. But that night, in his family's huge mansion, he made sure I knew I was nothing to them. It was our 3rd anniversary. His family invited us to their house, marble floors, chandeliers sparkling like they were mocking me, walls covered in paintings worth more than my whole life. I was nervous, but I told myself, this is my family now. I put on my best dress, one I saved up for months to buy. It wasn't fancy like theirs, but it made me feel good, like maybe I could fit in. I was so wrong. The second we walked in, I saw their eyes, his mom, his sister, his cousins, looking at me like I was something they scraped off their shoes. His mom started asking questions. What do your parents do? Where did you grow up? Her smile was fake, her voice cold. I tried to answer, keep my chin up, but then my husband laughed. Loud, like he wanted the whole room to hear. He said, she doesn't have much to offer, but she's got me. They all laughed like I was a joke. My face burned. I wanted to disappear. He leaned in close, his breath hot on my ear, and whispered, don't embarrass me. You're nobody without me. I froze. My hands shook under the table, twisting my napkin so hard it tore. My chest was so tight I could barely breathe. I looked around, and nobody said a word. His mom sipped her wine. His sister smirked. I felt like I was shrinking, like I wasn't even there. All those years I spent loving him, supporting him, believing in us. It meant nothing to them, to him. I grew up with nothing, but I always had my pride. That night, he took that from me too. I sat there silent, while they ate their fancy food and talked about their fancy lives. I kept my head down, picking at my plate, trying not to cry. Every laugh, every clink of their glasses felt like it was aimed at me. I kept thinking about my mom, how she'd tell me I was enough, how she'd hug me after a long day and say, you're my star. But that night, I didn't feel like a star. I felt like a shadow. I kept replaying his words in my head. Nobody, nobody, nobody. I wondered if I'd ever been anything to him at all. I don't know how I got through that dinner. I smiled when I had to, nodded when they spoke, but inside, I was screaming. I wanted to stand up, throw my glass at the wall, tell them they didn't know me. I wanted to tell him he was wrong, but I didn't. I just sat there, letting his words sink deeper, letting them make me feel small. I went home that night and cried in the bathroom, door locked, so he wouldn't hear. I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize myself. Who was I if the man I loved thought I was nothing? But something else happened that night too. Deep down under all that pain, a spark lit up. A tiny voice in me said, you're not nobody. It was quiet, but it was there. I didn't know it then, but that spark was the start of something big. That's what I want you to hold on to as I tell you this story. Because this isn't just about the night I broke. It's about the fight that came after. Drop a comment if you've ever felt like you weren't enough. I see you, and I'm here with you. I kept thinking about how I got here. Growing up, life wasn't easy. My mom raised me alone in a tiny house with peeling paint and a leaky roof. We didn't have much, but we had each other. She'd come home from her diner job, feet sore, and still make time to braid my hair or help with my homework. She'd say, you're gonna be something, baby. Don't let nobody tell you different. I carried that with me when I met him. He was charming, confident, from a world I didn't know. Private schools, family vacations to places I'd only seen in magazines. When he asked me out, I felt like I'd won the lottery. Me, the girl from nowhere, with this man who had everything. We fell in love fast. I ignored the red flags, like how he'd roll his eyes when I talked about my hometown, or how he'd change the subject when I mentioned my mom. I thought it was just differences, you know? I thought love would fix it. We got married quick, and I moved into his world. His family never warmed to me, but I kept trying. I'd bring homemade pies to their parties, smile at their backhanded compliments, pretend it didn't hurt when they forgot my name. I thought if I loved him enough, they'd accept me. That dinner proved me wrong. As the night went on, his mom kept digging. So you don't work? She asked like I was lazy. I tried to explain I'd been looking for a job, that I'd been helping with his business on the side, but she cut me off. "Oh, how sweet," she said, her voice dripping with pity. His sister chimed in. "James always did like charity cases." More laughter. My husband didn't defend me. He just sat there grinning, like he was proud of their jokes. I felt my throat close up, like I was choking on their words. I wanted to run, but my legs felt heavy, like I was stuck in quicksand. I kept glancing at him, hoping he'd say something. Anything to show he was on my side. But he didn't. He just ate his steak, laughed with his cousins, acted like I wasn't even there. I felt so alone in that room full of people. I thought about all the times I'd stayed up late helping him with his work. All the times I'd skipped meals to save money for our rent. All the dreams I'd put on hold to support his. And for what? To be called a nobody? The dinner dragged on. They talked about their vacations, their investments, their world I'd never be part of. I kept my head down, pushing food around my plate, trying to hold it together. Every time I looked up, I caught someone staring, like I was an exhibit in a museum. The poor wife, they might as well have called me. I felt my mom's voice in my head again, telling me I was enough. But it was drowned out by their laughter, by his whisper, "Nobody, nobody, nobody." When we finally left, I sat in the car, staring out the window, silent. He didn't even notice. He was on his phone, texting, laughing about something his cousin said. I felt like a ghost. When we got home, I locked myself in the bathroom and cried. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, eyes red, face puffy, spirit crushed. I kept asking myself, how did I let this happen? How did I let him make me feel like this? I thought about my mom, how she'd fought for me, how she'd never let anyone make her feel small. I felt ashamed for letting her down. But then something shifted. As I sat on that cold bathroom floor, tears streaming, I felt that spark again. That tiny voice saying, "You're not nobody." It was small, but it was stubborn. It was the part of me that remembered who I was before him. Before his money, before his family's cruel smiles. It was the part of me that grew up in Georgia, that learned to fight from a mom who never gave up. I didn't know it then, but that spark was the start of my comeback. That's what I want you to hold on to as we go through this story. It's not just about the night I was broken. It's about how I started to rebuild. So, tell me in the comments, have you ever had someone make you feel like you were nothing? What did you do to fight back? I'm here, reading every word, because we're in this together. This is AuntyMaeDiary, where we share the real stuff, the pain, the betrayal, and the strength that comes after. Stick with me, because this story's just getting started. I kept replaying that night in my head. Every detail burned into me like a brand. The way his mom's gold earrings glinted when she tilted her head, fake smiling as she asked about my family. The way his sister's laugh sounded like glass breaking. The way the chandelier light made my cheap dress look even plainer next to their designer clothes. I'd spent hours getting ready, curling my hair, putting on mascara, thinking I could show them I was good enough. But they saw right through me, not to who I was, but to what I didn't have: money, status, a last name that meant something in their world. I thought about the months leading up to that dinner. I'd been trying so hard to fit in. I'd go to their family events, stand quietly in the corner while they talked about things I didn't understand: stock markets, yacht trips, private schools. I'd nod, smile, try to laugh at the right times. My husband would pat my hand, like I was a kid who needed reassuring, but he never included me in the conversation. I thought it was just how things were, that I'd get used to it. I told myself I was lucky to have him, to have a life where I didn't have to worry about the lights getting cut off like when I was a kid. But that night showed me the truth. He didn't love me for me. He loved the idea of me, someone he could show off as his humble wife, someone who made him look good for marrying down. I was his charity case, his way of feeling like a big man. And his family? They played along, but they never accepted me. I was the outsider, the girl from the wrong side of town who didn't know which fork to use at their fancy dinners. I kept thinking about my mom. She'd always been my rock. Growing up, we didn't have much, but she made sure I had love. She'd come home from her diner job, her apron stained, her hands rough from washing dishes, and she'd still sit with me, listen to my dreams. She'd tell me stories about her own life, how she'd fought to raise me alone after my dad left. "You're strong," she'd say. "You got fire in you." But that night, sitting at that dinner table, I didn't feel strong. I felt like I'd let her down, like I'd forgotten who I was. The rest of the dinner was a blur. I don't even remember what I ate. I just kept my head down, trying to disappear. Every time someone laughed, I flinched, thinking it was about me. My husband didn't look at me once. He was too busy joking with his cousins, talking about some business deal, acting like I wasn't even there. I felt like I was drowning in their voices, their wealth, their world. I kept thinking, this isn't me. This isn't my life. But it was. I'd chosen it. I'd chosen him. When we got in the car to leave, I stared out the window, watching the mansion's lights fade in the distance. He didn't say a word about what happened. He just hummed along to the radio like it was any other night. I wanted to scream at him, ask him why he let them treat me like that, why he said those things. But I didn't. I was too afraid of what he'd say, afraid he'd confirm what I already feared, that I really was nothing to him. At home, I locked myself in the bathroom and let it all out. I cried so hard my chest hurt. I looked in the mirror, my mascara running, my eyes red, and I didn't know who I was anymore. I kept hearing his voice, nobody, nobody, nobody. I thought about all the sacrifices I'd made. I'd moved away from my mom, my friends, my whole life to be with him. I'd given up my dreams of going to school, of building something for myself, because he said he'd take care of me. And for what? To be laughed at? To be told I was nothing? But even in that dark moment, something stirred inside me. It was small, like a candle flickering in a storm, but it was there. A voice, maybe my mom's, maybe my own, saying, "You're not nobody." It was the part of me that remembered scraping by in Georgia, that remembered the fire my mom saw in me. I didn't know what to do with it yet, but I held on to it. That spark was all I had left. I want you to hold on to that too, as I tell you the rest of this story. Because this isn't just about the night. I was crushed. It's about what came next. It's about finding that fire again, about proving them wrong. Drop a comment. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't matter? How did you get through it? I'm reading every word, because we're in this together. This is AuntyMaeDiary, where we share the real pain, the real fights, and the real wins. Stick with me, because this is just the beginning. That night in the bathroom, staring at my tear-streaked face in the mirror, I felt like I'd lost myself. His words, nobody, 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 kept echoing in my head, louder than my own heartbeat. I was still in my dress, the one I'd felt so good in just hours ago, now crumpled like my spirit. I slid down to the cold tile floor, hugging my knees, trying to make sense of it all. How did I get here? How did the man I loved, the man I married, turn me into nothing in front of everyone? I gave him everything, my heart, my dreams, my whole life, and he threw it back in my face like it was trash. I kept thinking about my mom, her voice telling me I was enough, but it felt so far away, like a song I couldn't quite hear anymore. The next morning, I woke up with puffy eyes and a heavy heart. Our apartment, his apartment really paid for with his money, felt like a cage. He was already up drinking coffee, scrolling through his phone like nothing happened. I stood in the kitchen doorway watching him, waiting for something, an apology, a look, anything to show he knew how much he hurt me. But he just glanced up and said, "You're up late. You okay?" Like I'd just overslept, not cried my soul out all night. I nodded, because what else could I do? I didn't have the words to tell him how he'd broken me. I didn't even know where to start. I spent that day moving like a ghost. I made his breakfast, cleaned the dishes, folded his clothes, all the things I did to keep our life running. But every move felt empty. I kept seeing their faces at that dinner, his mom's fake smile, his sister's smirk, the way they laughed like I was nothing, and him, my husband, joining them. I kept asking myself, is this my life now? I'd left my small town in Georgia, my mom, my friends, to build a life with him. I thought we were a team, but I was starting to see I was just a prop in his world, something to make him feel good about himself. I tried to talk to him that night. I waited until he was watching TV, some sports game he didn't even care about. I sat on the couch, my hands twisting in my lap, and said, "Can we talk about last night?" My voice was small, like I was afraid of him. He didn't even look at me, just kept his eyes on the screen.
"What about it?"
he said, like it was no big deal. I took a deep breath, trying to find the courage. "What you said about me being nobody, it hurt." He sighed, like I was annoying him, and said, "Come on, it was just a joke. Don't be so sensitive, a joke." My whole world shattered, and he called it a joke. I wanted to scream, to shake him, to make him see how much those words cut me. But I didn't. I just sat there, feeling smaller than ever. He went back to his game, and I went to bed early, curling up under the blankets, trying to shut out the world. I kept thinking about my life before him. Back in Georgia, I had dreams. I wanted to go to college, maybe be a teacher or a writer, something that made a difference. I wasn't rich, but I was happy. I had my mom's laugh, my friends' late-night talks, a life that felt real. Now, I was living in his fancy apartment, surrounded by his things, and I'd never felt so lost. The next few days were more of the same. He acted like nothing happened. Going to work, meeting his rich friends, living his life. I tried to keep up, to be the wife he wanted. But every time I looked at him, I heard that word, nobody. I started noticing things I'd ignored before. The way he'd roll his eyes when I talked about my mom. The way he'd interrupt me if I tried to tell a story. The way he'd check his phone when I was pouring my heart out. I started to wonder if he ever loved me at all, or if I was just something he picked up to make himself look good. Like one of his expensive watches. One night I couldn't sleep. I got up and went to the kitchen, pulling out an old photo album I'd brought from home. It was one of the few things I still had from my old life. I flipped through the pages, seeing pictures of me and my mom, her smiling at my high school graduation, us eating ice cream on our porch, me laughing with my best friend at the county fair. I looked so happy, so alive. I didn't recognize that girl anymore. I touched the photos, my fingers tracing my mom's face, and I started to cry again. But this time, it wasn't just sadness. It was anger. Anger at him for making me feel small. Anger at myself for letting him. I thought about calling my mom, but it was late and I didn't want to worry her. She'd always been my rock, the one who told me I could do anything. Growing up, we didn't have much. Our house was small. The roof leaked, and sometimes we ate beans for dinner 3 nights in a row. But she made it okay. She'd tell me stories about her own struggles, how she kept going after my dad left, how she worked 2 jobs to give me a chance. "You're my fire," she'd say. "Don't let nobody put it out." I'd let him put it out. I'd let his family, his money, his world dim my light. I closed the photo album and sat there in the dark, the city lights glowing through the window. That spark I'd felt in the bathroom was still there, small but stubborn. It was like a whisper telling me I wasn't done yet. I started thinking about what I could do. I didn't have money, didn't have a job, didn't have his family's approval, but I had me. I had my mom's strength, my own heart, my own story. I didn't know how yet, but I knew I couldn't stay like this. I couldn't keep living in his shadow, letting his words define me. The next morning, I did something small but brave. I went to the library. Yeah, the public library. The one place I could go without spending money. I hadn't been there since we moved to the city, but it felt like home. The smell of books, the quiet hum of people reading, it reminded me of who I used to be. I sat at a computer and started looking up jobs, classes, anything to start building something of my own. I didn't have a plan, but I had that spark, and I wasn't going to let it die. I kept thinking, if I'm a nobody to him, I'll be a somebody to me. That's where this story's going. My dear friends, it's not just about the pain of that night, or the days after when I felt like a ghost. It's about what came next, about finding that fire again. I know some of you have felt this, someone making you feel like you're nothing, like you don't belong. That day at the library, sitting at that old computer with its sticky keyboard, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't big, not yet, but it was real, a tiny piece of me waking up. Like a plant pushing through cracked dirt. I'd spent weeks replaying that awful anniversary dinner, hearing my husband's voice call me a nobody, seeing his family's smirks, feeling their laughter cut through me. I'd let it sink so deep I almost believed it. But sitting there, scrolling through job listings and free classes, I started to hear my mom's voice again. "You're my fire," she'd say. "Don't let nobody put it out." I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I knew I couldn't keep living like a shadow in his world. I had to do something, anything to feel like me again. The library was quiet, just the hum of the air conditioner and the soft flip of pages from some kid nearby. It reminded me of home, of afternoons spent reading in Georgia when I was a kid, dreaming of a bigger life. Back then, I wanted to be a teacher or maybe write stories, something that mattered. I'd let those dreams slip away when I met him, thinking his love, his money, his world would be enough. But they weren't. His world just made me feel small. like I was always begging for a seat at their table. That day, I decided I wasn't begging anymore. I was going to build my own table. I started small. I found a free online course for creative writing at the library's website. It was basic, just some videos and assignments, but it felt like a lifeline. I signed up using an old email address I hadn't touched in years, one he didn't know about. It felt like a secret, like I was stealing a piece of myself back. I also applied for a part-time job at a coffee shop downtown. It wasn't much, just minimum wage, a few hours a week, but it was something I could call mine. I didn't tell him. I didn't want his voice in my head, telling me it was pointless, that I'd never be anything without him. When I got home that day, he was on the couch, scrolling through his phone, same as always. The apartment smelled like his cologne, sharp and expensive, and it made my stomach turn. I wanted to tell him about the course, the job application, the spark I felt, but I stopped myself. He wouldn't get it. He'd probably laugh, say something like, "What? You think you're going to be a writer now?" So I kept it to myself, like a treasure I wasn't ready to share. I went to the kitchen, made dinner, acted like everything was normal. But inside I was buzzing. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a piece of me he couldn't touch. That night, I started the writing course in secret. I waited until he was asleep, his snores filling the apartment. And I sat at the kitchen table with my old laptop. The screen glowed soft, lighting up my face as I watched the first video. The teacher was a woman with kind eyes, talking about how writing could heal, how it could help you find your voice. I felt tears prick my eyes, not sad ones this time, but something else, hope maybe. I started the first assignment. Write about a moment that changed you. I didn't even have to think. I wrote about that dinner, about his words, about the way his family's laughter made me feel like I was disappearing. I wrote until my fingers hurt, until the sun started peeking through the blinds. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The next day, I got a call from the coffee shop. They wanted me to come in for an interview. My heart jumped. I hadn't worked since we got married. He always said he'd take care of me, that I didn't need a job. But standing in that tiny kitchen, phone in my hand, I felt a rush of something I hadn't felt in years, pride. I told them I'd be there, and I hung up before I could talk myself out of it. I didn't tell him about that either. I started keeping secrets, small ones at first, but they felt like armor. Every secret was a brick in the wall I was building between me and his world. The interview was a few days later. I put on my best jeans and a blouse I hadn't worn in forever, one my mom got me for my birthday years ago. I looked in the mirror and saw a flicker of the old me, the girl who used to laugh loud and dream big. The coffee shop was small, with mismatched chairs and the smell of fresh coffee beans. The manager, a woman with a warm smile, asked me why I wanted the job. I could have lied, said something easy, but I told her the truth. I need something that's mine, I said. I need to feel like I'm enough. She nodded, like she got it, and said, "You start Monday." When I walked out of that shop, I felt taller, like I was standing on my own 2 feet for the first time in years. I didn't tell him about the job. I knew he'd make it about him, say I was embarrassing him by working some lowly job. But it wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I started going to the library every day, working on my writing course, reading books about women who'd faced hard things and come out stronger. I read about women who'd been told they were nothing, who'd been laughed at, who'd been left behind, and who'd fought back. Their stories lit something up in me, made that spark grow into a flame. At home, things were the same but different. He didn't notice the change in me, not at first. He was too busy with his work, his friends, his life. But I started to see him differently. I saw how he'd talk over me when his friends came over, how he'd leave his dishes for me to clean, how he'd never ask about my day. I started to see the truth. He didn't love me, not the real me. He loved the idea of me, someone he could control, someone who made him feel big by staying small. One night, I was writing at the kitchen table when he came home late, smelling like whiskey and his fancy cologne. He looked at me at the laptop and said, "What are you doing? Playing games?" I closed the laptop quick, my heart racing, and said, "Just messing around." He smirked, like he didn't believe I could be doing anything important. "Don't stay up too late," he said, like I was a kid. I nodded, but inside I was burning. That smirk, that tone, it was the same as that night at the dinner, the same as his family's laughter. I wasn't going to let it crush me again. I started working at the coffee shop the next week. It was hard. Long hours on my feet, rude customers, spilled coffee. But I loved it. Every paycheck, even if it was small, felt like a win. I'd cash it and tuck the money away in an old tin box I hid under the bed. It wasn't much, but it was mine, earned with my own hands. I started writing more too, pouring my heart into stories about my life. My mom, the girl I used to be. I wrote about the dinner, about his words, about the spark that kept me going. I didn't know it then, but those words were building something bigger, something that would change everything. I kept thinking about my mom, how she'd fought for me, how she'd never let anyone make her feel small. I called her one day, sitting in the library, my voice low so no one would hear. "Mama," I said, "I'm trying to find myself again." She was quiet for a second, then said, "Baby, you never lost yourself. You just forgot where to look." I cried right there in the library. But it wasn't sad tears. It was like she'd handed me a map to find my way back. That's what this is about, y'all. It's not just about that awful night or the weeks of feeling like a ghost. It's about the fire I found, the steps I took, the me I'm fighting to get back. I know some of you have been there, feeling like you're not enough, like someone's words stole your light. Every morning at the coffee shop, I felt a little more like me. The smell of roasted beans, the chatter of customers, the weight of my apron, it grounded me. I'd wipe down tables, pour lattes, smile at strangers. And for those few hours, I wasn't the nobody my husband called me. I was the girl who got things done, who made people's days better with a cup of coffee and a kind word. My paycheck, small as it was, went into that tin box under the bed, growing heavier each week. It wasn't just money, it was proof I could stand on my own. But at home, I was still walking on eggshells, hiding my job, my writing, my spark, because I knew he'd try to snuff it out. I'd been working at the coffee shop for a month when things started to crack. I was getting better at keeping secrets, slipping out early for my shifts, saying I was running errands when he asked where I was going. He didn't push, didn't care enough to notice the change in me. But I was changing. I'd sit at the library after work, writing stories on my laptop, pouring out everything, the dinner, his words, the way his family's laughter still echoed in my head. My writing teacher left notes on my assignments, saying my words had power, that they felt real. That word stuck with me. I hadn't felt real in so long, but those stories, those late nights typing until my eyes burned, were bringing me back to life. One day I came home from the coffee shop, my shoes still damp from a spilled mocha, and he was waiting for me. He was sitting at the kitchen table, arms crossed, his face hard. My heart sank. I knew that look. It was the same one he had at the dinner. The one that said I'd done something wrong just by existing. "Where were you?" he asked, his voice sharp. I tried to play it cool, said I'd been at the store, but he wasn't buying it. He stood up, towering over me, and said, "I called the store. You weren't there. What are you hiding?" My stomach twisted. I'd been so careful, but I'd slipped up somewhere. Left a clue, a receipt, a text, something. I stood there, my hands shaking, trying to think of a lie, but I was tired of lying. Tired of hiding. Tired of pretending I was okay with being his nobody. So I told the truth. "I got a job," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes widened like I'd slapped him. "A job?" he said, laughing, but it wasn't a kind laugh. "What, like some waitress? You think that's going to make you something?" His words stung, but they didn't cut like they used to. I stood taller, looked him in the eye, and said, "It's not about you. It's about me." He stared at me, like he didn't know who I was anymore. And maybe he didn't. I wasn't the same woman he'd married, the one who'd shrink to fit his world. That fight changed things. He didn't yell, didn't raise his hand, nothing like that. But his silence was worse. For days, he barely spoke to me. He'd come home late, eat dinner without a word, sleep on his side of the bed like I wasn't there. It was like I'd betrayed him by wanting something for myself. I kept going to work, kept writing, kept adding to my tin box, but the air in the apartment was heavy, like a storm was coming. I started to see him for who he was. Not the charming man I fell for, but someone who needed me small to feel big. Someone who'd never loved the real me, only the version he could control. One night, I was at the library working on a story about my mom. I wrote about her hands, rough from years of cleaning houses and waitressing, but gentle when she braided my hair. I wrote about how she'd sing to me when I was scared, how she'd tell me I was her fire. I was so lost in the words, I didn't notice the time. When I got home, it was past midnight, and he was waiting again. This time, he had my laptop open. My heart stopped. I'd left it on the table, my writing file still up. He'd read it, my stories, my pain, everything I'd kept hidden. "What is this?" he said, his voice low, dangerous. He turned the screen to me, my words glowing like a confession. "You're writing about me? About my family?" I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I tried to explain, to say it was just for me, for healing, but he cut me off. "You think you're some kind of writer now? You think you're better than us?" He slammed the laptop shut and I flinched. "You're embarrassing me," he said. "You're embarrassing yourself." There it was again. Nobody. Without him saying it. I wanted to scream, to tell him he didn't own me. But my throat was tight, and all I could do was stand there. My hands clenched into fists. After he went to bed, I opened the laptop again. My story was still there, untouched. But it felt different now, like he'd tainted it. I sat down and kept writing anyway. Because it was mine, and he couldn't take it away. I wrote about that moment, about his anger, about the way his words tried to shrink me again. But this time I didn't feel small. I felt angry. Angry at him for thinking he could control me. Angry at myself for letting him for so long. That anger mixed with the spark I'd been nursing, and it grew hotter, brighter, like a fire I couldn't ignore. The next day at the coffee shop, I told my manager about the writing course. She listened, really listened, and said, "You should share those stories. They're powerful." I laughed it off, said they were just for me, but her words stuck. I started to wonder what it would be like to share my truth, to let other people hear it. I thought about the women I'd read about, the ones who'd fought back against people who tried to break them. I wanted to be like them. I wanted to be someone my mom would be proud of. I started saving more than just money in that tin box. I saved ideas, dreams, pieces of myself. I wrote down things I wanted, small things, like buying my mom a new dress, and big things like leaving him, starting over, being free. I didn't know how I'd get there, but I knew I couldn't stay where I was. Every shift at the coffee shop, every word I wrote, every secret I kept was a step away from his world and toward mine. One afternoon, I was wiping down tables when a customer left a note on a napkin. It said, "You've got a light in you. Don't let it go out." I don't know why, but I kept that napkin. I tucked it into my tin box next to my cash and my dreams. It felt like a sign, like the universe was telling me to keep going. I started to see my life in two parts. The one with him, where I was nobody, and the one I was building, where I was becoming somebody. I wasn't there yet, but I was closer than I'd ever been. That's where I was, standing at the edge of something new. Something scary but real. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew I couldn't go back to being his shadow. I was finding my fire, and no matter how hard he tried to put it out, I wasn't going to let him. I stood in the coffee shop, my apron tied tight, staring at the napkin with those words, "You've got a light in you. Don't let it go out." That note became my anchor, tucked in my tin box with my savings and dreams. It reminded me of the fire my mom always saw in me, the fire I'd almost let my husband extinguish. But not anymore. I was done hiding, done shrinking, done letting his world define me. That spark I'd felt after that awful anniversary dinner had grown into a flame, and I was ready to let it burn bright. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for the girl I used to be, the one who believed she could do anything, and for every woman who'd ever been told she was nothing. It started with a decision. I wasn't going to leave him right away. I didn't have enough money or a clear plan yet, but I was going to build a life that was mine, one he couldn't touch. My writing course had become my lifeline. I'd poured my heart into stories about my life, my pain, my mom's strength, and they were starting to feel like more than just words. One day, my teacher emailed me about a local writing contest. The prize was small, just $100 and a chance to read your work at a community event. But it felt huge. I spent nights at the library, crafting a piece about that dinner, about being called a nobody, about finding my way back. I didn't hold back. I wrote the raw truth. Every sting of his words, every tear I'd cried, every moment I'd started to rise. I didn't tell him about the contest. I didn't tell him about the coffee shop job growing into more hours, or how my manager had started trusting me to close up, giving me a key like I was somebody who mattered. I didn't tell him how I'd saved enough in my tin box to cover a month's rent somewhere else, somewhere small but mine. I kept it all close, like a shield, because I knew he'd try to tear it down. And he almost did. One night, he found my tin box under the bed. I came home from a late shift, my hands still smelling like coffee, and saw him holding it, the lid open. My cash and that napkin in his hand. "What's this?" he said, his voice sharp, like he'd caught me stealing. "You're hiding money now? Planning to run off?" His eyes were cold, like they were at that dinner. And for a second, I felt that old fear creep in. But then I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a man who needed me small to feel big. I took a deep breath and said, "That's mine. I earned it." He laughed, tossing the napkin on the floor. "Earned it? Serving coffee? You think that makes you something?" I picked up the napkin, held it tight, and said, "Yeah, it does. It makes me me." That was the moment I knew I was done. Not just with him, but with his whole world. The mansion, the fake smiles, the weight of their judgment. I didn't yell, didn't cry. I just walked away, locked myself in the bathroom, and started planning. I called my mom the next day, her voice crackling through the phone. "I'm coming home," I said. She didn't ask questions, just said, "I'm here, baby." I found a cheap apartment near the coffee shop. Nothing fancy, just a studio with creaky floors and a tiny window. But it was enough. I packed my clothes, my photo album, my tin box, and left while he was at work. I didn't leave a note. He didn't deserve one. The writing contest was a week later. I stood on a small stage in a community center, my hands shaking as I held my story. The room was full of strangers, but they felt like friends. Their eyes locked on me, waiting. I read my words, about the dinner, about his cruelty, about the fire I'd found. When I finished, the room was quiet for a second, then erupted in claps. A woman in the front row was crying, nodding like she knew my pain. I won the contest, but that wasn't the real prize. The real prize was standing there, my voice strong, my heart full, knowing I wasn't nobody. I was me. That night, I got a text from him. He'd found out I'd left, probably from his sister who saw me moving boxes. "You'll regret this," he wrote. "You're nothing without me." I stared at the words, waiting for them to hurt, but they didn't. I deleted the text, blocked his number, and felt free. My revenge wasn't loud or dramatic. It wasn't about hurting him back. It was about choosing myself, about building a life where his words couldn't touch me. I kept working at the coffee shop, kept writing, started sharing my stories at open mics. People listened. They clapped, they hugged me, they told me I was strong, and I believed them. I think about that dinner sometimes, but it doesn't break me anymore. It's just a chapter, not the whole book. I'm back in touch with my mom, visiting her in Georgia, laughing like we used to. I'm saving for school, dreaming again, writing every day. I'm not rich, but I'm rich in ways he'll never understand. Friends who see me, a job I earned, a voice that's mine. I showed him who I am by showing myself first. So here's my question to you. Have you ever had someone try to make you feel small? How did you rise up? Drop your story in the comments. I'm reading everyone, because your strength inspires me. If this hit you, smash that like button, hit subscribe, and join AuntyMaeDiary. We're telling real stories here, pain, betrayal, and the kind of comeback that makes you feel alive. Next time, I'm sharing another woman's fight, one that'll make your heart race. Don't miss it. This is AuntyMaeDiary, where we turn hurt into power. Stick with us.